Aren't we all making one giant mistake when we think that morality is an objective thing that we can pin down and formulate? I mean, just compare morality today with morality 2,000 years ago. When a child with disabilities was born in ancient Greece, they would just leave the child on the mountain to be eaten. Today, we're appalled by this behavior. And then compare morality here in Sweden with morality in China. They are clearly different, right? So there seems to be no such thing as a single ethic, but rather many different ethics that are relative to the society one is living in. If there is anything that anthropology has taught us, it is that different societies vary immensely. So if we want to formulate an ethical theory, shouldn't it be relative to one's culture or society? Moral relativism can be distinguished from what could be called ethical nihilism, which claims that there is no such thing as morality at all. Through that view, there are no acts that could be considered morally bad or good, right or wrong. But rather, moral relativism claims that there are such things as good actions. It is just that they are decided by your society and not by some weird-looking philosopher like myself proclaiming objective moral doctrines for everybody to follow. Oh well. So let's get to the code of conduct, and then we'll go from there. Once again, we find this formulation in Moral Theory by Mark Timmons. An action A performed by a member of C is obligatory if and only if, and because, according to the basic moral norms of C, A is required. Now, this theory seems to be close to the actual state of affairs in the world, right? Our ethical theory should be as close to reality as possible. But I'm going to be frank. Moral relativism can sound intuitively correct, but in my opinion, it's a really bad theory and probably incorrect. Let me explain why. As mentioned, there seems to be a diversity of moral doctrines throughout both space and time. But can we really infer relativism from such a diversity? For starters, how people act and have acted within different societies is strictly an empirical matter. It is a matter of facts and not a matter of oughts. So it doesn't follow logically that one ought to act in the same way as people have acted, which relates to Hume's law, which we have discussed in depth on this channel. We can formulate an argument as such. P1. My society condemns homosexuality. P2. I ought to act according to my society. Conclusion. I ought to condemn homosexuals. P1 might be true for some people, right? But the only way to make this argument valid and sound is if both premises are true. But the only way, I believe, to make P2 true is if you accept moral relativism as a doctrine. P2 does not logically follow from P1, right? You cannot derive the ought from the is here. But sure, if one believes moral relativism to be true, it checks out. But then there is a big problem concerning the standard of determinacy. The deontic status, whether an action is right or wrong, is determined by one's culture or society. But how should we define culture? It seems like one can be part of many different cultures at the same time. For instance, here in Sweden, abortion is legal, but how ought a Swedish Catholic woman who is pregnant act if she wants to get an abortion? Here we have two conflicting cultures. One says, go ahead, perform the abortion, while the other heavily speaks against such an action. So the Swedish Catholic woman will simply not get an answer on how she should act from the theory of moral relativism. And this is only one example. Because it seems that all of us belongs to a plurality of cultures. I, for one, belong to the cultures of Sweden, of manhood, of philosophers, of university students, well, etc. I think you catch my drift. All of these different ways of being come with different ways of acting. But which should take precedence? So, how we define culture is an urgent matter for the moral relativists. Another problem with this theory is that it seems to completely undermine democratic rule. If moral relativism is correct, then a culture or society can never be wrong about anything regarding morality. Let's say I live in a country where capital punishment is legal. Then, by this theory, capital punishment is the morally correct thing to do to criminals. But if I were to utter the sentence, capital punishment is wrong, that sentence is simply false. I simply cannot disagree with the culture that I belong to, right? Therefore, the society I live in would probably never endorse democratic rule, because they can never be wrong about anything regarding morality. Also, it completely undermines how we commonly compare cultures with each other. For instance, we in today's Western society want to say that the persecution of homosexuality back in the day was bad. But according to moral relativism, that is simply not the case. Which also means that there is no such thing as progress of cultures. Moral relativism also fails to satisfy the standard of internal support. We all have a strong gut feeling that certain actions are just dead wrong. For instance, the act of killing innocent people is always considered to be a bad action, no matter what. But for instance, part of the National Socialist value system was that the Jews should be exterminated. So whenever a German soldier during the Holocaust killed a Jew, he, in fact, according to moral relativism, performed a good action. Yeah. A moral relativist must accept that the action made during the Holocaust were good actions, which I think we simply shouldn't accept. Sorry if any of you are supporters of moral relativism. I just think it's a bad theory with too many problems. Can they be resolved? Maybe. I would probably even regard moral nihilism as a better theory. But, oh well, that concludes the moral theory part of this series on ethics. In the next episode, we will try to apply all these different theories into practice. Also, if you want to know more about a much better theory than moral relativism, then I suggest you to watch this video here about the superior theory of Kantianism.